Number 10. Steven Stayner. It was December 4th, 1972, and a sweet 7-year-old boy named Steven Stayner was walking home from school in Merced, California. It was a journey he made almost every day. This time, he had no idea that he was already in the crosshairs of absolute evil. He wasn't the only one who was approached that day by Irvin Edward Murphy, an adult man who had a slightly spacey demeanor about him. Not threatening exactly, just a little off. Irvin had been passing out children's religious pamphlets, trying to gauge which of them had their faith in the Lord. Today, Steven's religious upbringing was about to punish him in the most cruel and horrific way imaginable. He humored Irvin because his mother had always taught him to be friendly and polite. Irvin asked Steven whether his mom would be interested in reading some religious literature. When Steven said that, yes, of course she would, the devil himself rolled up in a white Buick to receive them. The man behind the wheel was Kenneth Parnell, who seemingly was friendly enough. Kenneth had a lot in common with the boys of Steven's age, like a love for playing pretend. He lured another innocent little boy into his clutches by pretending to be a helpful police officer in 1951. But the early 1970s was a more innocent time, before stranger danger and true crime documentaries. Steven and Irvin climbed into the back of Kenneth's Buick. Steven wouldn't be seen by any of his family members until he was 14. Life became hell for the Stayners, as nationwide campaigns to find their missing child seemed to turn up nothing. Steven's parents were devastated. Life was already hard enough with 4 other children. But the absence of Steven and the constant worrying for his return consumed them. Steven's older brother, Carey, felt like he was living in the shadow of his missing brother, neglected as the sheer gravity of his parents' grief pulled all their attention away from him. Perhaps if Steven had never been taken, the Stayner parents would have noticed the darkness growing inside Carey's heart. But it was already too late. Those first terrifying hours when Steven didn't come home from school turned to days, to weeks, to months, and then to years. And then the hopes of ever seeing him again started to fade away. Of course, they never gave up, but sometimes not giving up hurt even more, wondering what little Steven was suffering through. And the saddest part is whatever they were imagining in their worst-case scenarios still probably didn't approach the horrors Steven Stayner was actually living through. On March 1st, 1980, Steven Stayner reappeared, and he wasn't alone. The now 14-year-old Steven had appeared at the police station in Ukiah, California, with 5-year-old Timothy White at his side. Nobody could have imagined the chain of events that led to Steven and Timothy getting back to their families, but they were about to find out. After kidnapping Steven 7 years prior, Kenneth Parnell had him taken to an isolated cabin in Cathy's Valley, and that's where the brainwashing began. Kenneth had already pulled Irvin, an intellectually disabled man, into his thrall, convincing him that this kidnapping plot was a kind-hearted mission to raise a child religiously. The reality was nothing like that. Kenneth told Steven that his parents had given him up, that they had had too many kids, and that he was now Steven's legal guardian. So began almost a decade of cruelty and predation, as Kenneth moved Steven from school to school, giving him the new name Dennis Gregory Parnell. He took Steven's family, he took his personhood, he even took his identity, all hoping to mold him into the perfect tool. When Steven became a teenager, losing almost all hope of escape, Kenneth lost interest in him. That's when he decided to use him as a tool to lure in a younger boy. This never worked, and Kenneth always thought that Steven was incompetent. Little did he know Steven was quietly sabotaging the kidnapping attempts every time. It wasn't actually Steven's own safety that led him to escape after all these years of torment. It was Parnell's kidnapping of 5-year-old Timothy White, who he planned to put through all the same awful atrocities that he'd subjected Steven to. On March 1st, 1980, Steven decided that it was time to escape while Kenneth was away at work, taking Timothy with him. They hitchhiked for miles before reaching the Ukiah police station. A warrant was put out for Kenneth Parnell's arrest, and the 2 boys were returned home. But as you'll often find in some of the stories in this video, sometimes the darkness lingers on, even when the crime is over. Parnell would only spend 5 years in prison for his crime, and Steven would die in a motorcycle accident almost 10 years later at the age of 24. Timothy would be one of the pallbearers at his funeral. Steven's older brother, Carey, would go on to become a brutal serial killer who murdered 4 women. But a crime committed out of pure sadism sometimes makes more sense than a crime committed out of a twisted form of love. Number 9. Mao Yin. In October of 1988, Li Zhengjai, a woman working as a grain exporter in China, received a telegram containing 6 words that chilled her down to the bone. It was from her husband and it said, "Emergency at home, return right away." Gervaise, in a blind panic, asked her manager what all of this could possibly mean. Stony-faced, he simply replied with every parent's worst nightmare: "Your son is missing." This was how her and her husband's world began to collapse around her. The boy Mao Yin, only 2.5 years old, was her pride and joy. This was the time of China's infamous one-child policy, so every family was able to lavish all their love and attention on the single child they were permitted to have. Mao Yin had always been such a sweet and curious little boy. Gervaise would later recount a memorable trip to the zoo where the boy, nicknamed Jia, meaning great by his parents, even seemed to marvel with joy at a worm crawling across the ground. Nothing about the situation seemed to make sense. His father was just walking him home from kindergarten like he did every other day in their home city of Xi'an. Mao Yin's father stopped for just a moment at a nearby hotel to get him a glass of water. It was in the mere 2 minutes that he was cooling the water that his son vanished without a trace. It was every parent's worst nightmare, but they were optimistic at first. After alerting the authorities straight away, they assumed it wouldn't be long before the boy was found. They had no idea of the hard decades ahead of them. But it's likely that Mao Yin would have never been found at all if it wasn't for one crucial factor. Gervaise was a mother who would never give up, no matter what. With her son gone, she flew into action, printing off and distributing over 100,000 flyers in an attempt to put the word out about Mao Yin's disappearance. Her heart ached constantly with the pain of her loss. The nagging voice in the back of her head told her she would never see her son again. But that was a voice she refused to listen to. She would find her Jia, even if it took her the rest of her life. Amongst all this, Gervaise found out about a sinister rumor. Another young couple had apparently adopted a child that looked just like her missing boy. She wouldn't rest until she had this confirmed. She chased the couple across the country, but they always seemed to be one step ahead, taunting her with the possibility of ending her living nightmare. But in the end, she found out that the couple's little boy wasn't actually Mao Yin. It was a devastating blow. But no blow is ever enough for them to stop trying. Over the decades, Gervaise's search helped 29 other missing children be found and returned to their families. However, it seemed that this luck would never be extended to her. That was until technology actually caught up with the intensity of Gervaise's search. In April 2020, the police received a tip about a couple who had bought a child in Sichuan province for 6,000 yuan, or about $845, 32 years earlier. When they investigated, they were able to use a mix of photo fit and DNA testing technology to confirm that an adult man named Gu Ningning, the name the kidnappers had chosen for him, was indeed Mao Yin. All those years ago, he had been kidnapped by human traffickers and sold to a childless couple where he lived a completely different life. As much as it must have been horrifying for Gu to discover that his whole life was effectively a lie, the emotional reunion with his real mother and father made 32 years of searching worth every second. Some reunions come out of tremendous effort. Others come out of the most bizarre coincidences imaginable. Number 8. Zephany Nurse. It's said that birth is one of the hardest things a woman can ever experience, and no living person knows that better than Celeste Nurse. On April 28, 1997, Celeste had a cesarean section in the Groote Schuur Hospital of Cape Town, South Africa, to give birth to a healthy girl that she named Zephany. It was an exhausting and painful experience, leaving her in a fog of sedatives in the aftermath. Still, the fruits of her literal labor lay in a cot not far from her bed, taking turns between crying and sleeping. In the tense days that followed, she remembered a nurse approaching her bed, or at least a woman dressed like a nurse. The woman lifted Zephany out of the cot and held her, comforting her as she cried. Then the painkillers took hold and she fell unconscious. When Celeste woke up, she found a real nurse at her bedside, asking in a frantic panic where her baby was. The cot was empty. Zephany was gone. The police were called and they immediately began a full search of the hospital. They didn't find Zephany, but instead discovered a terrifying breadcrumb trail that indicated what a meticulous plan her kidnapper had acted out. They found a discarded pillow, which police believed her kidnapper had used to fake a baby bump in order to enter the hospital. Then she changed into a realistic nurse disguise and began befriending the other expectant mothers. While she may have seemed nice, she was really a wolf in sheep's clothing, trying to seek out the perfect target for her plan. In all likelihood, the fact that Celeste was booked in for a C-section meant that she'd be on anesthetic after the birth, making her out to be a more pliable victim. The plan had tragically gone off without a hitch. 5 days later, Celeste returned home without a baby. The years that followed were nothing short of torture. The Nurse family cooperated with investigators and engaged in ceaseless media campaigns to raise awareness of the missing Zephany. There were false leads amounting to nothing more than crushing disappointment. In one particularly disgusting instance, Glenda Dubell, a neighbor of Celeste's mother, pretended to know what had happened just to extort money out of the family. In all this time, Celeste had a second daughter, Cassidy, and in January 2015, 17 years after Zephany disappeared, she went to a new school. There, she met a slightly older girl named Miche Solomon, and all their friends remarked on what an uncanny resemblance there seemed to be between them. When Cassidy's father, Morn, had heard about this, he arranged a meeting between him and the daughter's new friend. It turns out that this daughter's new friend was his daughter too. A DNA test confirmed it. 17-year-old Misha Solomon was actually Zephany Nurse. The woman she believed was her mother was actually her kidnapper, Lavana Solomon. As much as Solomon's actions was undeniably monstrous, it's also difficult to not see her as pitiful. She was motivated in a fit of madness as a result of having several miscarriages. Lavana was arrested and taken to prison for kidnapping. Misha Solomon decided to live with her false father, who was proved to have no knowledge of the kidnapping that delivered his daughter. Zephany, who still goes by Misha Solomon after struggling to form a relationship with her birth parents, has since written a book about the whole experience titled Zephany: Two Mothers, One Daughter. It is an astonishing true story, and it's somehow about to get so much stranger. Number 7. Alex Batty. Alex Batty had what you might call a non-traditional upbringing. He was 2 years old when his father left. He was raised by his mother, Melanie, and his grandmother, Susan, who was later declared his legal guardian. He was 11 years old when his mother and grandfather took him on a vacation to Andalusia in Spain in 2017. All of this was agreed upon with Alex's grandmother, and they were expected to return to England on October 8th, but they never did. Alex was last seen at the port of Malaga. What is particularly bizarre about the Alex Batty case is that Susan soon received a Facebook message from Alex's kidnapper, her own daughter, Alex's mother. The message featured an eerie video of Alex with his mother and grandfather, where they explained that they were moving to an alternative lifestyle commune in Morocco. There, they would keep him away from what they viewed as the indoctrination of mainstream school and daily life in the UK. But while the life that Alex was being dragged into was definitely alternative, it certainly wasn't healthy. Alex would later say that the first few years of the nomadic life that his mother and grandfather had dragged him into were more like a vacation. But by the time he turned 14, reality set in. He casually helped out with painting and property renovations in exchange for lodging, ultimately leaving to pursue formal education and future stability. This was when he began considering a return to the UK. He would later go on to say, "I started weighing up the pros and cons of each lifestyle, and after a couple of months, I realized England was definitely the way forward." He left a note to his mother and left the remote guest house that he was staying in the middle of the night. He took what little money he had and a few essential supplies in the night. On December 13, 2023, he was found by a 26-year-old delivery man wandering along the side of the road at 3 a.m. The delivery man was concerned and picked Alex up, making this the absolute reverse of so many of these cases. Getting into a stranger's vehicle helped save Alex from his unsafe situation in this case. He was taken to the police, who helped to repatriate him back to the UK 6 years after he had disappeared. He didn't bear any ill will to his kidnappers in this case, saying that he still loved his mother and grandfather, he just didn't feel like living their lifestyle. But in terms of kids who eventually find their own way back home, Alex's journey is nothing compared to the long, surprising road taken by our next case. Number 6. Saroo Brierley. Saroo Munsi Khan was born around 1981 in Khandwa, Madhya Pradesh, India, to a Hindu mother and a Muslim father. His dad leaving the picture at a young age threw Saroo and his mother into poverty. His mother had to work a back-breaking construction job, and Saroo and his two siblings needed to beg at the local train station in order to make ends meet. A train ride, as it turned out, would be what redefined Saroo's life. In 1986, Saroo's older brother Gudu planned to ride a 43-mile train trip from Khandwa to the city of Burhanpur, where they could hopefully make a little more money. Saroo asked to tag along, and Gudu reluctantly allowed him, having no idea of the butterfly effect that was unfolding in real time. By the time the train arrived in Burhanpur, Saroo, who was only around 5 years old, was exhausted. Gudu told him to wait at the station and sleep it off, and that's exactly what Saroo did. That's when the first nightmarish twist happened. While Saroo slept, Gudu was hit by a train while crossing the tracks and killed. When Saroo woke up, he had no idea what was happening and was confused about why his brother wasn't there. After waiting for as long as he could, he panicked and boarded an empty carriage on a train that was parked at the station. Saroo was still exhausted after a long day and he fell asleep in the train car. It began its journey while he was asleep, and by the time he woke up, he was 930 miles away from home. Out of his element and far too young to remember or articulate what had happened to him, he was trapped almost 1,000 miles away from his impoverished mother. He was at the Howrah railway station in the booming metropolis of Calcutta, West Bengal. When he tried to hop onto other trains and find his way back home, they always ended up back in Howrah. He survived by scavenging scraps at the train station at first, before moving out further into the city to find any work to keep himself alive. He lived like this for weeks until he encountered a teenager who brought him to the police as a missing child. He was then taken to a facility for abandoned children. Because he couldn't provide any kind of information about his mother or his home due to his age, he was put up for adoption. In 1987, he was adopted by a family in Tasmania, Australia. Meanwhile, Saroo's mother, Kamla, was searching for her two missing boys. After receiving the devastating news that Gudu had been killed, she did everything she could to keep looking for Saroo. Saroo grew up in Australia, learning English and later getting a degree in business and hospitality at the Australian International Hotel School in Canberra. But while getting his qualifications, he was also working on another project, using Google Earth for years on end to try to find his way home. He carefully plotted railway lines across India from his hazy memories, putting together all the evidence he could to find his most probable point of origin. And that's what led him to find Khandwa. After contacting locals through a Facebook group, he became even more sure that this was his original hometown. He took a flight back 25 years after he first left and walked the streets with a photo of his child's self. He asked if anyone had lost a child over 2 decades ago in the area. Community members soon led him back to his mother and his surviving siblings, who were now educated and modestly successful. The heartwarming story of a reunion against the odds set the world on fire, and Saroo's book, A Long Way Home, was adapted into the Oscar-nominated movie Lion, starring Dev Patel as Saroo. But while this story was ready for Hollywood, our next one has more twists than the most deranged of thrillers. Number 5. Paul Fronczak. On April 26, 1964, at Michael Reese Hospital in Chicago, Illinois, Dora Fronczak gave birth to Paul Joseph Fronczak. She had no idea how bizarre her life was going to become. A day after the birth, a woman disguised as a nurse approached the bedridden Dora and told her that a doctor asked for a closer look at Paul just to make sure he was healthy. Seeing as Dora had no reason to believe she wasn't being told the truth here, she gave little Paul over and he was gone. The so-called nurse left the building with Paul and was never seen again. This sparked the biggest manhunt in Chicago history up to this point, with a mass mobilization of 175,000 postal workers, 200 police officers, and the FBI. The response in this case was exceptionally fast, with 600 homes being searched by midnight that same night. Sadly, it wasn't enough and Paul slipped through everyone's fingers. All of this was enough of a living nightmare on its own. But after this, things would get so much stranger for everyone involved. On July 2, 1965, an abandoned baby boy was found in a pushchair in the middle of a shopping mall out in Newark, New Jersey. The baby was put into foster care, where his foster parents gave him the name Scott McKinley. The FBI had other ideas about who he might be. Could his kidnapper have been struck with remorse, or realized that they didn't have the skills and resources to care for a child? Nobody could know, but Dora was so happy to see her son again that she hardly even cared. Paul was reunited with the Fronczak family, and it seemed like everything was going to be okay. Until Paul turned 10, and while looking for a sneak peek at his Christmas presents, instead he found a copy of one of the newspapers that reported on his kidnapping. Naturally, he was disturbed to see this, given that the event happened when he was too young to possibly remember it. He asked Dora about it, and she seemed distressed by him even finding out about it. She scolded him and said, "Yes, you were kidnapped, we found you, we love you, and that's all you need to know." But a response like that stoked Paul's worries rather than extinguishing them. From that day on, he always suspected that the Fronczaks weren't actually his real parents. But he remained silent on the subject for almost 40 years. In 2012, after carrying the burden his whole life, he took a DNA test and asked his parents to submit samples. They agreed at first, but after sending him the samples, they begged him not to go through with it. The idea of what he might discover was just too terrible. It wasn't an easy decision, but Paul decided to submit the DNA test kit, only to find out that he wasn't Paul at all. DNA confirmed that he was a completely different missing child named Jack Rosenthal, who had been left in the mall decades ago by his cruel and psychologically unbalanced birth parents. Turns out that Paul Fronczak had never come home. But in another bizarre twist of fate, the real Paul Fronczak was actually very much alive. A 2019 DNA test confirmed that Paul, having no idea of the sinister origins of his new life, was instead living as a man named Kevin Ray Batty in Michigan. He was never able to meet his birth mother in person, but they did have multiple phone conversations before he died of cancer at 56 years old. To this day, the question of who kidnapped the real, original Paul Fronczak has not been solved, and the FBI considers it an open case. Number 4. Natasha Ryan. Natasha Ann Ryan was 14 when her mother dropped her off at school in 1998. It was a freezing August in Rockhampton, Queensland, but nothing in the air seemed to foretell the awfulness to come. That evening, Natasha didn't come home, sparking immediate concern by her parents. They were worried about her, and their thoughts immediately turned to the most likely suspect, Scott Black, their daughter's 22-year-old boyfriend. Black had always been a bad influence on Natasha, as though a 22-year-old dating an underage girl wasn't enough of a glaring red flag. He'd encouraged her to try to run off with him and elope a month before she actually disappeared. But around that same time, a far more sinister possibility was floating to the surface: that Natasha might have been the victim of an active serial killer who was operating in the area where she disappeared. This was the crime spree of Leonard Frazier, who'd attacked and killed 4 to 7 women over his multi-year tenure before being caught in 1999, the year after Natasha's disappearance. That same year, Natasha's boyfriend, Scott Black, was also made to stand before the Rockhampton Magistrates Court on the case of Natasha's runaway attempt. He was convicted of obstruction charges for saying that he didn't know his underage girlfriend's whereabouts at the time. Some dared to think optimistically that perhaps lightning had struck twice and Scott was again responsible for Natasha's disappearance. But when nobody could find Natasha, her heartbroken parents conceded that she was possibly just another of Leonard Frazier's many victims. Frazier even confessed to her murder, seemingly closing the case. The family held a memorial service for their daughter. Then, in 2003, during Leonard Frazier's trial, the police received an anonymous tip that Natasha was alive and well in a house in North Rockhampton. Natasha's father almost collapsed when he heard the announcement. The house, which was being rented, of course, by Scott Black, was raided. Police found that Natasha had been hiding in a cupboard in the house's bedroom. This is what she would do whenever visitors came over, only freely moving around the house when it was just her and Scott, and only ever going out at night. Rather than being kidnapped, Natasha instead reframed the whole event as her running away with Scott of her own free will. Clearly, there was some grooming at play here, given the age difference between the two. The case became a media sensation. Then it got even more confusing. Natasha voluntarily gave evidence at the trial of her accused murderer, confirming she had never met him in her life. Both Natasha and Scott faced charges for the whole scheme, with Natasha fined for causing false investigations. Scott was sent to prison for perjury while paying massive investigation costs. Frazier died in prison in 2007. In 2008, Natasha and Scott married and continued to live off of their earnings from the whole fiasco. She was reported to have sold exclusive wedding photo rights to a magazine for $200,000. Like many of the stories in this video, Natasha's would not have a happy ending. She was found dead at Rockhampton Golf Club in 2024, aged 40. Authorities ruled out foul play, but early deaths often seem to be an eerie theme that comes along with these childhood disappearance incidents. Our tour of terrifying incidents has taken us all across the globe, but what happens when a horror story starts off with a promised trip to the happiest place on earth? Number 3. Susan Gervaise. The 1960s was a shockingly innocent time, a time before the constant paranoia of 24-hour news and social media striking fear into all of our hearts. In 1969, 4-year-old Susan Priest from Pontefract, England, was on a caravanning holiday with her single mother and her sibling. Another family from Scotland at the same camp made Susan's mother an incredible offer. They would happily take Susan on a free, once-in-a-lifetime trip to Florida for her to visit Disney World. All she would need to do would be to give them Susan's birth certificate, and they could add her to their passport for the trip. Ignoring every red flag in giving your 4-year-old child to some strangers for an international trip, she agreed and delivered the documents. Of course, the promise that had been made to her was a lie. Susan was never taken to Disney World. Instead, she was taken to Canada and New Zealand before settling in Australia with her new parents. She just believed that she'd been adopted. At 16, the signature of her real mother was needed for New Zealand passport documents, revealing there was no adoption papers. Her fake parents claimed that she was voluntarily given up. But by this time, she had no idea how to get back to her birth mother. Her name was now Susan Gervaise, and she couldn't remember her original last name. Her fake mother died from multiple sclerosis when Susan was 10, leaving her to be raised very loved by her traveling community. By the time Susan was 21, both kidnappers had died, with her birth family still searching for her back in England. She decided to try to make that connection happen after all these years. With the encouragement of her husband and children, Susan was able to find her family through a Pontefract Locals Facebook group, 53 years after she had first disappeared. She was able to reconnect with her siblings and arrange an in-person meeting. Sadly, her birth mother died 8 years before all this, never knowing what happened to her daughter. All because one couple decided to deceive a parent and snatch their child away forever. We've discussed so many frightening cases in this video, but none so far can compare to what happens when your kidnapping is also a murder. Number 2. Heather Robinson. In a video that's featured some truly monstrous criminals, few are quite as diabolical as John Edward Robinson, or as he liked to call himself online, Slave Master. In his horrific crime spree that left 8 women dead, Robinson became known as the internet's first serial killer. He was one of the first to use the web as a means of running his numerous scams and tricking innocents into his clutches. In 1985, he approached the 19-year-old mother Lisa Stasi in the Hope House Women's Shelter under the false name John Osborne. He promised to provide lodgings and financial aid to destitute 19-year-old Lisa and her 4-month-old daughter Tiffany in exchange for her signing blank papers. This was really just a scheme to forge adoption relinquishment documents to steal and sell the baby before brutally murdering Lisa. Incidentally, the day after Lisa Stasi disappeared, Robinson approached his brother Don and his wife with an incredible deal. The couple had trouble adopting, but he had just happened to find a baby from a woman who was, well, no longer with them. The Robinsons immediately adopted Tiffany Stasi, and they renamed her Heather Robinson. They would forever be thankful to Heather's Uncle John for giving them a miracle baby. Of course, he didn't do it out of the kindness of his heart. He made his own brother pay him $5,500 in legal fees in exchange for the girl. His evil made no exception for family members. It was only when Heather turned 15 that she learned the terrible truth after her Uncle John was arrested for his crimes. Her own uncle had murdered her birth mother and given her to her new parents. Robinson is on death row to this day while Heather does what she can to continue living something close to a normal life. But what about the kid who took the longest amount of time ever to find his way back home? Number 1. Luis Albino. When it comes to missing children returning after they first disappeared, no case is stranger and more improbable than that of 6-year-old Luis Albino. In 1951, Luis and his older brother Roger were playing at a park in Oakland, California, when a strange adult woman approached them. She seemed friendly enough, especially to the younger and more naive Luis. But there was something off-putting about her. She told Luis that if he followed her, she could give him some free candy for his trouble. An easy enough ploy when people still barely thought of child kidnappers as existing. As Luis went with the woman, Roger followed, keeping an eye on them. At only 10 years old, if the situation went south, he couldn't exactly do much. So instead, he ran home to alert an adult, but by that time, it was already too late. Luis had been taken. Naturally, Luis's family went straight to the Oakland police forces. Because Luis's mother, Antonia, was Puerto Rican and only spoke Spanish, Roger was the main point of contact. The investigators there actually took the words of young Roger very seriously. They launched a massive joint manhunt based strictly on his testimony that an unknown woman wearing a bandana had led Luis away. As vital hours in the investigation slipped away, the Coast Guard canvassed the waters around Jack London Square and San Francisco Bay, where they found nothing. While this was happening, the real chance to get Luis back slipped through their fingers. There were no leads, and despite Antonia's incredibly frequent visits to the Oakland police station, no progress was made. The family made another push for answers in 1966, 15 years later. By this time, Luis would have been 21 if he was still alive, As the Albinos hoped, he might have left a record on military service exams, seeing as the draft for the Vietnam War was now in full effect. No luck, but they still didn't lose hope. They made multiple trips back to Puerto Rico to search for Luis, in case he'd been taken there. Still no sign. The years turned into decades. Eventually, Antonia passed away in 2005 without any closure into what happened to her son. Roger, despite not having any real power to have changed the situation, likely carried the guilt of not being able to save his brother for all this time. People likely assumed Luis was dead by now, his body little more than bones. But everything changed in 2020 as a result of pure chance. Alida Alekin, Luis's 63-year-old niece, decided to do a DNA test just for fun, but in the process discovered that she had a 22% DNA match all the way across the country on the East Coast. It seemed too good to be true, but could it be Luis? It was worth a try. She tried to get in contact but never got a reply. Instead, she returned to the Oakland police in 2024 and gave them the information, asking for their help in investigating this new lead. The FBI and the California Department of Justice took it from there, and hope prevailed. It was indeed Luis Albino, discovered at 79 years old, 73 years after he first disappeared. While the unknown woman who kidnapped him had likely long since died, Luis could confirm that he was taken to an East Coast couple who raised him as their own. In the 7 decades since he disappeared, he'd worked as a firefighter and served 2 tours in Vietnam in the Marine Corps. He'd also had both children and grandchildren. When the link was confirmed, Luis traveled back to California. He was able to meet with his brother, Roger, 2 months before Roger himself would pass away. It's yet more proof that real life is often so much stranger than fiction. Still got an appetite for more freaky missing mysteries? You gotta check out Employee Missing for 10 Years Found Inside Supermarket and more missing people stories. Or watch this instead.